Okay, I'm starting to record now. Okay, so I want to just share a nice piece from the Netziv, which I'll share on the screen. I mean, I didn't have time to like make the whole sheets, but it's harder because you have to actually look through the entire text, which we'll do. But if you have a chumash handy, we will start. I'm going to go to the text also, but I'm actually not going to do the 10 Commandments. How's that? Okay, because it's like, oh, been there, done that, right? We might even be able to name all 10 of them. But if you want to see something very interesting, if you go to the church that's across the street from our house, they have a giant 10 Commandments there, and they have the wrong order. They have the wrong order of the commandments. So I don't know. They must have a different Masorah. I also have to make another disclaimer is that my mother, God bless her, she should live and be well. Kanana Hara, like 86. She's going to be 87 soon. And she discovered YouTube. And so she's like the sole watcher of the Eighth Time YouTube channel. She calls me up. Thank you. I'm up to 2. She says, I watch you all day. And then we had in our Gemara Shiur last week or 2 weeks ago, we studied the Mishnah that deals with the difference between Shiloh and Yerushalayim. And what I did on the virtual shiur is we took a virtual tour of Shiloh, of Mishkan Shiloh, through their website. And we did. That's one of the beauties of being able to do that online. So we're able to do that. So my mother says, our next trip, I want to go to Israel, maybe next year for Yeshiva week. I want to go to Shiloh. Can you book it? I really love that. So I'm like, God bless her. So now I have to behave because then she's going to watch this. But this is like my mother, like, we got her a phone and she could do FaceTime, which is amazing. I mean, half the time when you FaceTime, it's like, Mom, hello, Mom, I'm looking at your ear. But God bless her. It's amazing when people can embrace new things. So hi, Mom. If you're watching, you're going to see this later. Hi, I'm behaving. I'm good. Okay, good. All right. So let's see. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the, let's go to the text. And here we go. Yitro, Vayishma Yitro. Now, just to give you in a nutshell, does anybody know or anybody want to share sort of like if this is the parsha of Matan Torah, then why in the world do we have this whole business of Yitro? Like, what's really going on here, or what happens here? It's actually an entire chapter. It's the entire chapter 18. Before you get to chapter 19, okay, is Yitro comes, he meets, he celebrates, he gives advice to his son-in-law, and he leaves, and then we go into Matan Torah. In other words, what would be lacking if we cut this chapter out? So can anybody have an answer to that question? Like, what's so important about this chapter?
I have an answer to your first question, which is Yitro was a convert, and in Judaism, we embrace the converts, we welcome them, and it's more of a statement about us as the Jewish people.
But they're not even the Jewish people yet because they didn't even get the Torah yet.
But it's more of a statement about Yitro being
okay. I fully agree with you. That's great. The question is what is it doing here? Like, why put this chapter here?
I think part of the question is, are we looking at why is he here, or why is his advice here? They kind of
either one. So what was his advice?
To set up people to help him, no?
Right. So that's in a nutshell. Is he looks at Moshe, and like any good father-in-law, not every father-in-law is good, by the way, but like any good father-in-law, he tells his son-in-law what he should do. Don't get me started on the mother-in-laws because that's a whole other thing. Okay.
Your wife better not be listening to this too.
No, don't worry. She's going to be a great mother-in-law. You think you know how to take care of my son? I'm going to show you how to take care of my son. Oh. Anyway, hi, Vivian.
Hi, Rabbi. Sorry.
By the way, Zelly's cooking. She's doing her Fashos Challah if you want. She's so frum. She's like always separating challah. I love it. Anyway, the advice that he gives his son-in-law, by the way, unsolicited advice, which is the best kind, right? And he says, and just to give you kind of like the nutshell of it, is like, yeah, you're working too hard. You should have a better system in place. So then the question becomes, okay, like, do we really need Yitro to tell Moshe that? Like, Moshe couldn't figure that out on his own? Like, Does he have some sort of like martyr complex? There are some people, by the way, who are not good at accepting help. There are people like that. I don't know if anybody knows anybody like that who just like they have to do everything themselves, or they don't want to put it on other people. Or I'll tell you this: there was we lost a lot of great rabbis the last. Oh my gosh! I just think about like, I had this like when I couldn't sleep one night, and I had this mind for like a piece of poetry or writing, and like what the scene looks like in Yeshiva Shalmala this year, when like every day there's new admittances from all these great sages. Just this week alone, and you think of Rav David Soloveitchik and Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky. Rabbi Twersky is the only person I know who wrote more books than Erica Brown. And he was unbelievable. And I shared this yesterday when we had our little coffee chat. So I don't know if you had a chance to see this. If you didn't, it's worth looking the video. It will not be hard to find. Is that he had one tzava, he had one commandment at his funeral. That at his funeral, they should only play the song, which I didn't realize, but he composed the tune to the song Hoshia Samecha, which is Hoshia Samecha Uvarech. Now, like, wait, we all know that. That's like Simchas Torah, right? That's, he composed it for his twin brother's wedding over 60 years ago. And he said that since the song brought so much joy to Yidden all over the world, he hoped that's what should escort him into Shemayim. That's all he wanted. And there's a beautiful video of them escorting his body, singing Hoshia Samecha. So I can imagine like what it's like in Yeshiva Shalmala, and then like another one comes in, and I'm like, here, take a seat next to Rabbi Sachs. You take a seat next to Rabbi Lamb. You take a seat next to Rabbi Steinsaltz. So like it's unbelievable what's going on here, and the level of Torah that is in the world. So one of the great rabbis that we lost was Rabbi Yehuda Kellemer. I don't even know Rabbi Yehuda Kellemer. Most people probably around here did not know him, but he was the rabbi in Young Israel, West Hempstead, for a million years, for a very, very long time. But one of the things I know about Rabbi Kellemer, besides being one of the most caring and really incredible human beings, is that they begged him for years to take an assistant rabbi. He always refused until finally in the later years he begrudgingly accepted, but he always refused because he felt that it's like the assistant rabbi does all like the grunt work, like we dump all he says it's not fair, and he felt it would be like an insult to the kavod of an assistant rabbi to have to do all those kind of things. So that's why that was the kind of individual he was, is that he wanted to have, he was a real leader, and we'll see that model actually comes through based on what the Netziv tells us. So there's an interesting Rashi which I want to say here, and this is actually a Rashi I've often used, especially particularly if you're ever at a board meeting or at a committee meeting. And this is a very important, it's worth the price of admission for this Dvar Torah alone, but it gets us started. So Rashi says, okay, Vayishma Yitro, here to the bottom of our page. What did he hear? He heard, okay. And then Rashi tells us he had 7 names. Reuel, Yeser, Yisro, Chovav, Chever, Keni, Putil, okay. Fine. So why is he called Yeser? It's the second line here, if you could see my cursor. Al Shem She Yeser Parsha Achas Batorah Ve'ata Techazeh. He was called Yeser because the fact that they added a parsha in the Torah based on him. But Rashi says Ve'ata Techazeh. Now Ve'ata Techazeh, if you have the Chumash in front of you, Ve'ata Techazeh does not appear until verse 21, until Pasuk Chaf Aleph. This is the commentary on Pasuk Aleph. What happens is Yisro comes, he reunites, he sees, he sees everything with Moshe, and then in Pasuk Chaf Aleph he says, "V'ata techazeh mikol ha'amat shechayil yira le'im anshe emasani batza v'samta le'im sar le'im sar me'il sari chamishim v'sar yasaros." He says, "Okay, here's what you're going to do, Moshe. You have to make some sort of hierarchy of people that are going to help you out do this." So the question is, first of all, that this Rashi is also sensitive. Like, why do we have this extra parsha? Because of Yisro, that's cute as a name. Yet there, it's extra. That's really nice. But what's the whole point? And it says, and the part that Rashi points out that says that was extra was Ve'ata Techazeh. But the whole parsha starts here in Pasuk Aleph. Why does Rashi go all the way to Pasuk Chaf Aleph? Ve'ata Techazeh. So what I heard from my Rebbe, from Rabbi, I forgot who said it, but I heard it from Rabbi Jacob J. Shafter. J. Shafter told us that anybody in the world can make criticisms. Anybody can point out what's wrong. Ve'ata Techazeh is the pasuk where Yisrael not only criticizes or he gives Moshe critique, but he also gives a constructive suggestion. The parsha is called by his name because he gives a working solution. So that's number one. So if you're ever in a committee meeting, people love to give pointers. They love to tell you, what's wrong with the problem. So the first answer is, okay, so you'll head up that committee, right? Well, no, I didn't mean, I didn't, I was just saying, you know how that goes. But if you want to, there's a difference between making a criticism, but also making a criticism and then also coming up with constructive suggestions. So that's point number one. That's Ve'ata Sechazes. Anyway, so we still have left with the question is, what did Yitro really offer? What does he bring to the table when it comes to this question with Moshe? So I'm gonna switch the page here. Let's go ahead a little bit. Come on. We got to keep going. 325. Did you see my page? Is it changing?
Yes.
Thank you. I never know what the Zoom gods are doing. Okay, here we go. Vahimi macharas. And it's the next day. And I'm just going to move my bar on top here. Vayeshev Moshe lishpot es ha'am, vayamod ha'am al Moshe min haboker ad ha'arev. So the next day, this is after, it's the second Aliyah, and they reunited, and they have a feast, and Zipporah is back. Okay. Moshe goes to judge the nation. Vayamod ha'am al Moshe min haboker ad ha'arev. And they literally, it says that the nation stands on Moshe from morning till night. Now, the imagery is very clear here. Vayamod ha'am al Moshe. It's like, right? You ever like, if you want a good snapshot of this in a microcosmic sort of way, is like a very well-known scholar in residence after he delivers the Shabbos morning talk in shul at Kiddush. Okay, there's everybody swarms around, and they the guy Nebuch, he just wants to get a drink. She just wants to have a piece of cake, and there's people can't even walk 2 feet So by the way, one of my jobs as when I have guest speakers is I have to handle them. I have to make sure that they get fed, they get a drink. We gotta make sure to keep the nudniks away. It is right. Anybody quotes me on that, I'll deny it. Even though we're being recorded and it's gonna be on the internet forever. Okay. But that's the truth. I mean, come on, the guy just spoke for 3 hours. Oh, more get him a drink. Come on, lazim leben. Okay, but people don't know how to do that. We're Jews. So the people are standing on Moshe min haboker ad ha'arev. Vayar chosein Moshe es kol asher hu oseh la'am. Vayomer, and he says, Ma hadavar hazeh asher ata oseh la'am, madua ata yoshev levadecha v'chol ha'am nitzav alecha min boker ad ha'arev. I didn't switch the page because we're going to look at the Nitziv on the bottom. So just literally, it's a funny word to use, by the way. So the Chosein Moshe, by the way, it doesn't call him by name. That's a whole other question here. But Yisro sees es kol asher hu oseh la'am. Everything that Moshe does, la'am. How do you translate that?
For the nation.
Is it for the nation?
It could be to the nation.
To the nation.
To the nation, right? How if you would say for them, I would say it's be'ad ha'am. Bishvil, beglal, whatever. But la'am is everything he's doing to them. And he says, what is this that you're doing? Again, ma hadavar sharata oseh la'am. What are you doing to this nation? Why do you sit by yourself? And the entire people are standing. And by the way, it's nitzav alecha min boker ad ha'arev. Now, when you hear the word nitzav alecha or nitzav alav, what do you think? What comes to mind?
They're on him, not letting him rest.
Yeah, but what phrase
No,
when you
there's
say,
something
let's
he's
say, V'hinei shlosha anashim nitzavim alav. That's right. Avraham and the angels. So again, if I were Erica, I would have a painting to show you right now, but I don't because I'm not smart like her. But Moshe's sitting, Abraham's sitting by his tent, and he's like, he's probably like Eis gewebt. He's got he's like half passed out, and it's the sun, and he's got his kafia, whatever they were wearing over his head, and all of a sudden, like the shadows come, and 3 guys are nitzavim alav. They're standing over him. They don't approach. That's the imagery of nitzavim alav. So here he says, all the nation is nitzav alecha. Again, mit boker ad orev, like lazim leben, from morning until night. Okay, so he's asking like what's going on here? So what is Yitro really asking him? So look what the Nitziv says here. We're going to go to the bottom here to the Nitziv. Okay, here we go. This is the Hamek Davar. So it's the bottom here where it says Yudalid, and here the Nitziv has, and again it's a running commentary on these psukim which we're going to look through, which has a really important interpretation of this episode, which particularly explains why it is found here before Matan Torah as opposed to some random place. Anytime Yisro appears, by the way, in person in the Chumash, it's sort of these like quick in and out situations. Right before they're going into Israel, Moshe goes to grab him. We see that later in Bamidbar, and here, and then he comes and then he leaves. It's a whole weird question, like when did Yisro, the Gemara has this ongoing machloka, says, was Yisro before the giving of the Torah, afterwards? If we say that he was before the giving of the Torah, if we take this in chronological order, this will make a lot of sense. Anyway, look what the Nitziv says here on the bottom, Yudalit. He says, Shalu Shnei Devarim. He asked Moshe really 2 things. Aleph, now in the second column. Madua ata yoshev levadecha. Why do you sit by yourself? Ein hashe'ela lama eina moshev kol ha'am. He's not saying like, why are you speaking to the whole nation? Like, why doesn't everybody have a place to sit? He's like, why do you have, like, why levadecha? Like, why don't you get someone to help you? That's the practical question, which anybody could have said, like, you don't have to do this all yourself. But Beis, the second thing he's asking him is, B'chol ha'am nitzav alecha min boker ad aref. He says, what's bothering the Nitziv here, or what is he playing in on? He's playing on the word dayek kol ha'am. What does he mean, the entire nation? Let me ask you this. What could the entire nation want from Moshe at any given time? Who should be going to Moshe? If you have an issue, if you have a machlokas, if you need something that needs to be adjudicated, you have a question, everybody has to go? He says, Hainu shara v'hisponein, shar harbe anoshim yesham, she'ein b'neim ta'anos v'hisatzmus klal. He says, Moshe, half these people that are here, or a majority of these people here, they don't really have an issue. They're just like hanging around. He's like, why do you have them here? They're nudniks. Get them out of here. If somebody has a machlokas, if somebody has a taina on somebody else, and they have to figure something out, and you need to adjudicate it, that I understand. He says, but why are you going on? So look what Moshe responds. And we're gonna switch the page now. Here we go. Next haba. I love Hebrew books. I love Hebrew books, and I love HebrewBooks.org. Okay. You with me? Did the page change?
Yes.
Vayomer Moshe lechosno ki yavo elai ha'am lidrosh Elohim. He says, first of all, Moshe gives 2 answers. When they come to me, when the people come to me to seek God, yavo elai ha'am lidrosh Elohim, and then he gives a second answer. Ki hiyeh lahem davar bo elai v'shafarti bein ish uvein re'ehu. If they have a matter that I have to adjudicate, I will adjudicate between man and his fellow. And v'hodati es chukei holokim v'estarosav, and I will tell them what the law is. Okay? So he says, first of all, they have a couple things they have to do. They have to find out, like, what does that mean? Let's use this imagery again. Who's the last person that we heard of is Vatelech Lidrosh El Hashem. Who was that? Somebody was having a difficult pregnancy, and let's think back to Parshas Toldos. Rivka was having a difficult pregnancy, and Vayisrot Satzu Abonim B'Kirba Vatelech Lidrosh Es Hashem. So she was like, she had a spiritual calling. She was looking for spiritual guidance. So that's the first thing, is that people want to seek God. They want to know, you know what? Moshe, I have issues. I have religious issues. You know, like, Moshe, can God create the rock that he can't lift? You know, like they were doing all the discovery questions. and Moshe's running like a discovery seminar for them, and then they're asking, well, God, really, do we need like the 3 sets of dishes? Like all these things. By the way, none of this has happened yet, obviously, because they've only gotten very little of the Torah. If you say that this is before Matan Torah, but this is something that only Moshe could do. In other words, who gets the word directly from God is Moshe Rabbeinu. So who's the one that could possibly answer it? It is Moshe Rabbeinu. And the next thing that he has to do is, I have to adjudicate civil matters. We have grievances, we have machlokas, we have territorial disputes, whatever it is. That's v'shafarti bein ish ubein re'ehu. And the third thing that he says, and that's the next pasuk, is I have to teach them then I have to teach Torah. That's the last part of the pasuk here. I need to teach them Torah. So what is Moshe? So he says this. So Yitro asks 2 things according to the Netziv. Why are all these people here? Well, you could get help. And also, why are all these people here if they don't have issues? So Moshe says, no. There's like religious, spiritual issues that only I can handle. Yes, there are grievances to which you mention. And then there are also, I need to teach Torah, which only I can do. So then Yitro gives it advice. Vayomer Chosei Moshe elav lo tov hadavar asher ata oseh. He says, this is not good what you're doing. Because then he continues, Navol tibol gam ata gam amazeh asher imach ki chaved mimacha davar lo tuchal asahu levadecha. He says, this is not good. Because what is Navol tibol? It's like, you're going to be eisgevecht. You're going to get worn out from this. I'll read you the Art Scroll translation. You will surely become worn out, you as well as this people that is with you. For the matter is too hard for you. You will not be able to do it alone. Now, what exactly is he responding to? So let's see what the Netziv says right here again on the bottom. So, after explaining all the questions that he has, and Moshe says, look, he says here on the second column, Kol zeh heshiv Moshe lahasbir shebishvil shehaya nitzrach lekama inyanim she'efshar b'ladeihem. Moshe said they need me for many different matters, which can't be done by anybody else. Akeni efshar lahoshe v'cherim imo gam b'devar hamishpatim. He says, just because I have grievances, whatever, there are other matters too. He says, I have to handle all of it. It's almost like Moshe saying, yeah, I wish I could give it off, but I really can't. So then Yitro answers, no, this is bad what you're doing. He says, this is lo tov asher ata oseh. By the way, lo tov hadavar. It's almost like when we say, lo tov hayos adam levado. There's ways of saying things are bad or things that are not good. Is there a difference between saying something is bad or something is not good? Lo tov hayos adam levado, which is also, by the way, it sounds pejorative, but it's followed by an immediate repair of eselo ezer kenegdo. It's not good for man to be alone, but I will make a partner. Here, Moshe, this is not good what you're doing. This is what we have to do. And he follows it about Tasach and Pasuk of Aleph. So here, Devarim Sha'ata Oseh Hainu Lidrosh Alehim V'Odativ. He says, all those things, he's saying what's not good in the whole, like, you finding God for them and teaching the laws. He says, Be'elu hadvarim lo tovhu oseh. Hakavana she'ena oseh b'shleimos. He says, what he's saying is, he says, you're doing it improperly. Yisro's not saying it's bad for you to do it, but the way in which you're going about it, he says, this is not okay. He says, look at it, he continues. He says, Naval Tibol, you're going to be worn out. Gam b'devar hamishpatim. He says that, of course, when it comes to adjudicating matters, yes, you have to do it, and you're doing a fine job. He says, but you're going to be worn out even from that based on how you're dealing with the other 2 issues. Aval yesh chashash yoser, says the Netziv. We go to the next page of the Netziv. What is the next chashash? What are you worried about? Shetibol gamata. He says, like Moshe, you're going to burn out. Afagav shekol ma'asecha bekoch elokai mikol makam ha'oshek yolach chacham. He says, you know what? Even though you have everything is sort of l'shem shemayim, but you're going to burn yourself out. It's not going to work. And why? So what's the problem? The Netziv points out to us, and this is going to be a model of leadership for Moshe Rabbeinu, which makes it so important why we have this now before Matan Torah. Did someone have a question? I'm sorry, what? Or is Chedva just making noise? Is that what's happening?
Yes, sorry.
Is the dog outside?
He's quiet.
Okay, Baruch Hashem. Because we have an understanding, the dog and I. What's the dog's name?
Jackson.
Jackson. I'm going to Jackson. Yeah, who sang that song?
Don't know.
Johnny Cash, come on. Okay, so here it is. Here's the crux of the Netziv right here. We're going to see in the bottom of the first column. He says, Haya atala'am. He says, and because the pasuk continues, he says, this is the advice that I'm going to give you. He says, listen to my voice. God's going to be with you. Hayei atala'am mul ha'elohim. You will be for the nation opposite of God. And you will bring the words of the people to God. Now, it's not like Moshe said, I'm bringing the word of God to the people. And Yitro is saying, no, you need to bring the word of the people to God. And look what he says here. And he says something, it's something you would not necessarily look at when reading this parsha. We kind of just skim over it because we're so excited to get to Matan Torah, to chapter 19 and chapter 20. But this is such an important groundwork that the Netziv lays for us. Listen, look at this. He says, Haya atala am, ha'misalav masa b'shnei dvarim yosem masher hayad ko. He says what he's actually doing. Yisro's not making Moshe's life easier. He's actually making Moshe's life harder. He's making his job more. He says, ha'misalav masa. He's putting upon him a burden in two things. Yoser masher hayad ko, even more than he had until now. V'amar be'inyan arishon shel lidrosh Elohim. He said, he says, the first thing he says is you have to go seek God, and people are seeking God, which means that people want to know, what does God want from them? Velo, I'm back in the left column. Velo levakesh avuro, lo king tase ela hayei atal la'amul alokim vevesa. He says, it's not that you have to bring, as I mentioned, God to the people. You have to bring the people to God. What does that mean? Shnei ofani emtsaim bein adam l'shamayim. There are two types of intermediaries between humans and heaven. Like any good commentary, they're going to say that it's like a mashal mahadavadome, melech basar vadam. It's like a human king. And what happens with a human king is that b'malchusa da'ara she'en kol adam motze atzmo roy lavo lamelech l'drosh mimenu dato o lavaksho eze davar. He says not everybody has the wherewithal to just go to the king and ask something, right? I mean, just think about it right now. Like if we had a king, the highest ranking officer in the land, okay? It's not that easy to get a message to the highest ranking officer in the land. It's just not. And certainly when you have a king, he says, you can't just go lavo lamelech. By the way, notice the play on words. He uses the Purim lingo. Lidrosh mimenu lavaksho ezu davar, the words that we see in the Megillah, which is coming up soon. He says, therefore, we have two types of intermediaries. Aleph, the first one is Ha'ish shehamelech mina oso lahanhig misara, or it is v'hu yodeh v'choker das hamelech madil l'shalom. First of all, there's an officer. The king appoints, let's say, a legal officer, and his job is to guide the people. And he knows what the king wants, and he has to tell any of us. So everybody wants to know, he's the justice minister, so to say. Like, what does the king want? What do we do about this, that, and the other? Nope, he's in charge. This is exactly how the king would decide. He says, but the second one is Sha'am yesh lahem eza adam chacham v'ahuv l'melech v'ra'ui lehisiyatzev lefanov. There's always somebody that has sort of an in with the king. He's wise. This is most important word is ahuv. He's beloved, and he can stand. He's fitting to stand in front of the king. And somebody could be sort of like a melech. He could be, you know what? He has the king's ear, and if he has the ability, he can. If we have an issue, we have someone that represents us. So this is like our representative of our community that will represent our interests to the king. It says, and they're two very different individuals, these two characters. The people, the justice minister who's appointed by the king, who just has to give over the king's feelings and laws, he doesn't really care. He doesn't have a kesher. He doesn't have any sort of varmkeit with the people. He's the intermediary, and he does what the king says. And he doesn't have the people's interest in mind necessarily. His interest is he's working for the king. I do what the king says. He says, but the person who's not appointed by the king, but he's a confidant, the king, he has the king's ear somehow, and he's interested in bringing the word of the people to the king, he says, and he asks on their behalf. He says, Kach b'malchusa derakia. He says that's the same thing happens in heaven as well. She'ein kol adam. We're going to go to the next page. That not everybody Yisrael motzei atzmo muchshor lishboch siach lifnei kel mikol shkein lishol dato al pinavu. He says it's not like we have the ability to just say like, oh God, we know God's going to hear my cry. God's going to listen to me. I mean, we believe on a certain level that God listens to our tefillas, but sometimes, and probably most of the time, we wonder if God is listening to us, right? I mean, if you just think about everything that we've witnessed in the last year, you wonder you tap it on the microphone, God, is this thing on? I'm like, or maybe when are we going to get the message? Like, what is God really trying to tell us? This is a kind of a wacky year, right? He says, Al Cain, O Shabayim El Navi Asher Hakim Hashem Oso B'Shas Lios and Soy V'Darshim in Das Elyon. He says, either maybe there is a Navi, maybe there's a prophet that God appointed to be the intermediary, and somehow they can, through that individual, seek God. He says, or somehow they could, if you have a Navi, but we don't live in a period of Nevi'im, but if there were Nevi'im, and even the Nevi'im, most of the time it was usually a one-way street. Nevi'im were giving the word of God to the people. It wasn't necessarily the other way around. Oh, however, where it says 113, Shabayim l'gdolei hador, afadal she'eno Navi, this is the concept of going to Gedolim. Why do people go and make themselves Meshuggah? They go to big rabbis and they go to wait in line because they think that maybe they have some sort of connection or some sort of they can help with your requests or to get your tefillas over. He says you go to the Gadol Ador, the great of the nation, even though he's not a Navi, but he's Ro'il Yispal Lifnei Hashem. And this is part of the problems that when we deify the Gedolim, I don't know if anybody saw the cover of the New York Times this weekend. The Saturday New York Times had a cover story on Chaim Kanievsky and his response to the coronavirus and his handlers, etc. It wasn't 100% awful. It was only like half awful, but it's worth reading. But this is a big bone of contention with how the Gedolim sort of are presented and handled. But what do they have? But no, that they're holy people and that they are fitting to daven to God. We feel like they have like a better line. They have a more direct connection than we have. So why not use their connection? He says, and it's based on the Gemara. Look at the Gemara. Bava Basra says, if you have a chole, someone who's sick, what do? You go to a chacham, you go to a wise person, and you ask that he should ask for mercy on your behalf. And the Gemara Chagiga says, etc. So therefore, you have these gedolim that can help on your behalf. So the Nitziv continues. V'amar Yisro l'Moshe. So Moshe says, Yisro says to Moshe, he says, he says, if you present yourself as just an agent of God, he says, you're going to wear yourself out. You're just going to be giving a message. You're going to be filled with frustration. Ella hayei atala amul Elohim. Now we read the psukim carefully. It says, you have to be taking the words of the nation to God. Your purpose is to go on their behalf. And he says, and you have to take all of their words, whatever issue they're having, you have to take to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? Again, I'm continuing in the second column here. Lavakesh Avaro, he says, there are two I'm sorry, we saw this part. I'm sorry, I went back a page by accident. Somebody's FaceTiming me now. I don't need that. That's what happens when somebody Really? Don't they know that I'm having a class now and they're FaceTiming? Anyway, the Nitziv says, and this is where he says his pasuk. He says when you look at pasuk Yud Tes and Chaf, he says you have to bring the words of the people to God, and then he says v'hizarta eshem es hachukim v'esataros v'odata lehem es haderech yelchubav es ha'maser asher yasun. V'hizartem, he says, what is v'hizartem? You shall warn them or caution them. He doesn't tell him just to let them know the words of the Torah. V'hizartem osam v'hizarta osem hosif od masa. He gave him another burden. Be'inyan hashlishi she'amar v'hodati es chukei Elokim v'torasav, when Moshe says, oh, I let them know what the laws are, Harei einu ela modia v'lo mazir lakim. He says there's a difference between being a modia, just letting them know, or his artem says, I really care about you and I care about the consequences, and that's why I want you to know the consequences of their action. And he says, lahashkiach al kiyumam. The Amar v'hizartem behei besof hamora she'im lo ata lo toil pulas achrim. It's more of a strength. V'hizarta v'hizar ata. You have to do it, Moshe, because if you don't do it, the below koach elokesh Moshe lo yenasakar. It won't be done properly. So, in essence, what the Netziv is saying here, I'll let me just move everybody over here. Oh, there we are. Okay. What the Netziv is saying, and if we look at this chapter now in this context, Moshe Rabbeinu comes, he's reunited with his father-in-law. They haven't gotten the Torah yet. They're almost at Mount Sinai. And Yitro says to him, whereas we normally look at this story and we say, oh, Moshe, you're working too hard, like make it easier. Now, we don't need Yitro for that, and Moshe probably could figure that out on his own. What's really happening, the Netziv says on a deeper level, is he's saying, you're not being an effective leader. You're not being an effective spiritual leader. An effective spiritual leader is not just giving over the information. He's someone that, like, just think about it. Think about it. Think about like the best teachers that you ever had in school. It was not just the ones that like bombarded you with information. It was the ones that somehow, through whatever method, you were able to develop a connection with, and you felt like, and when you had that connection, it's like whatever would come out of their mouth, I would soak up like a sponge. If you're ever zochah to have a teacher like that, then you're very, very lucky. Okay, I've been zochah to have teachers like that, and it's like anything they could say, anything they write, I can get like it's almost like when you know when I get the Rabbi Sachs email in my inbox every week, it's like I can't wait to read it because it's like everything he says and something it's like it might be the most basic simple idea, but the way he says it and the way he connect to it, it's like you want to lick up every last drop of the plate. So he's saying, Moshe, you're going about it wrong. It's not about making your job easier or harder. It's about doing a better job at what you're doing. And he says, Moshe, your perspective is all wrong. Your perspective is not about just, adjudicating matters and bringing the word of God and answering questions. No, you have to represent the people to God. And Moshe, and so why Yitro? Because Yitro is Kohen Midyan. Yitro is a spiritual leader. He understands this. Even though he may have a different religion up until now, he converted, he didn't convert, whatever the story is at what point, but he understands what it means to be. And that's precisely why this is found before Matan Torah. Before we can have a Matan Torah, before the Jewish people can receive the Torah, we have to have the proper conduit. We have to have the proper agent who can give that Torah, and that's Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, he's saying, Moshe, you want to be an effective leader? You want to be an effective transmitter of Torah? Well, you have to be a transmitter of the people to God, and that's what we have to represent them. And that's his whole parsha. If you read through the whole chapter now, he's saying, you know what? Again, we look back at him. He says, oh, Moshe, he asks Moshe, what are you doing now? Moshe gives an answer. And he says, no, that's not good. You're going to burn out. He says, listen, Shema B'koli, and listen to what I advise you. And God, V'hi Elokim imach, and God will be with you. You have to be for the nation, Mul Elokim. It's such a simple phrase, but it's so powerful. Heyei ata la'am. You have to be, again, that's why it's la'am. Here it is not to, like, you're not speaking to the people. You have to be from the people to God. Heyei ata la'am Mul Elohim. You're the nation towards God, and then you have to bring the Devarim El Ha-Elohim. You have to bring the words to God. And then V'hizarta Eshem. And then you have to instruct and teach them and with passion. And then if you do this properly in this fashion, they will follow you. And then he gives his advice. By the way, you could also make your life easier. You could have other people helping you. But his real advice is telling Moshe, listen, if you want to be an effective spiritual leader, you're going about this all wrong. So it's a beautiful piece of the Netziv. And it really does underscore the question of why is this chapter even here? In other words, if we had left last week and we had gone, the people, they finally beat Amalek, and then the next thing that it said is chapter 19. In the third month, they left of leaving Egypt, they came to the midbar of Sinai. Nobody would say, oh, there's something missing. Instead, we have this whole interlude of chapter 18, Yitro, the conversation with Moshe. He's reunited with him, and then Yitro leaves. It's like a very bizarre conversation, but it's very important because it's telling you how to be a good leader. So again, one of these, the best leadership guide that you have is in the Torah, is in the Chumash, and this is what we have here with Yitro and his son-in-law. So it's not just also like an annoying father-in-law trying to tell his son-in-law what to do, and but he is telling him something about the family business. He's like, you know what, I know a little bit about this business because this is what I've been doing, Kohen Midyan, for so long. Moshe, while you were out there running after the sheep for 60 years, I was shepherding my own flock, and I know exactly what's going on. So he has actually a tremendous amount to offer, and maybe that's why the parsha is named for him. The parsha is named for him because if not for Yisro, maybe it says in the Tziv, maybe Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't be Moshe Rabbeinu. And of course, without Moshe Rabbeinu, what do we have? And that brings us to Matan Torah. So again, it's an often skipped over chapter because we don't get to, we're so focused on the 10 Commandments and the events leading up to it. And there's a lot to say there, and God willing, we will, and then when the time comes. But for now, I wanted to share this with you about this piece of the Netziv. This is a very, very well-known piece of the Netziv. It's a seminal piece in the Netziv. It's worth knowing and sharing. And remember that first part again. If you ever have to make a presentation at a meeting, at a committee, at a board, whatever it is that you're doing, use that as a great example. That it's one thing to offer criticism, but it's another thing to give criticism followed by constructive solutions. That's what gets things done. So everybody have fun with the rest of your snow day. And it's good to be back. Good to see everyone. And hope everybody's staying safe and, Zoom away.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you